So you've also got to think about, okay, what is the problem? But going back to that earlier point of the two sides of a coin, is one of the problems that you're trying to fix your own freedom and lifestyle, because that is something that many of us struggle with as as doctors, let's say.
In today's episode, I connected with Dr Behrooz Behbod, who is otherwise known as a public health consultant and the entrepreneur's doctor. So B, as he likes to be called, is actually trained at Harvard and Oxford. Clever guy with over 25 years of international experience across health, business and education. And he also has dedicated a good deal of his time supporting health professionals who are looking to become entrepreneurs and scale their impact whilst working less. So the initial scope of this conversation was really focused on academia and entrepreneurialism and medical education, and why entrepreneurialism hasn't had so much of a look in until very recently. But we've also talked about entrepreneurialism as a sustainable career, taking time out in your week to reflect and use that time rather than filling it with other stuff, especially if you are someone that has suffered from burnout, but you're looking to create something new. So a really varied, reflective discussion. And I hope that you enjoy and can use it as a foundation for any decisions that you may make moving forward in your career as an enterprising doctor. Anyway, on to the episode. Let's face it, burnout amongst doctors is sky high, and we're actively seeking other ways to make the most of our transferable skills beyond the usual career pathways. Welcome to Disrupting Doctors' Careers. I'm your host, Dr. Abena Bubbs-Jones, and I'm on a mission to connect 1 million doctors across the world with the best in diverse career opportunities. Hey, so today we have B. He said earlier on, I was sorry. We're keeping the laughter in, right? So yeah. We've got Behrooz here, or B, as he likes to be called, Behbod, public health consultant and the entrepreneur's doctor. There is no other doctor but Behrooz as the entrepreneur's doctor. And I love the branding, like it just totally owns it. And you know what this is about. And one of the reasons why I was so interested in having this conversation, because we're both doctors in strange specialties, but doing the cool entrepreneurialism thing too. And we can talk about that in particular. So I'm in occupational health, you're in public health. We are linked, but also separate. And also the opportunities for doctors as entrepreneurs and why this is not usually part of the standard part of the medical curriculum. So as we know, that academia tends to always be the forefront and the driver for medical schools. But why is entrepreneur, I can't even say the word now, entrepreneurism not? Why is it not? And should it be? But welcome.
Thank you, Venus.
How are you today?
Good.
Sorry, I do ramble on. And one of the things I was saying to B earlier was like, actually, let's just go off piece, because we probably have a lot to talk about that probably won't be in the scope of what I've just said. But let's see how this goes. So tell me a little bit more. Let's start with your entrepreneurial journey as a doctor. So when were you looking at other options? When did you start and why?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, if you go way back, just briefly, I think it was finishing high school, A-levels up in Leeds. And in our yearbook, one of my friends wrote about me, like a paragraph, like he's going to be an entrepreneur. First of all, I had no idea what an entrepreneur was back then. And secondly, I was completely against the idea of business. I just hated the idea. I don't know why. It's not a political perspective. It's just I wasn't into that. I was purely for clinical practice. And anyway, fast forward. And ever since finishing the house jobs, I was always looking for a way to go upstream and to get into more prevention, but had no idea what public health was other than p-values and statistics and all the boring stuff, which I do for a day-to-day living right now. But the thing that, piqued my interest was when I started seeing friends of mine during my PhD in the States. We were all doing public health, and environmental public health specifically. And I would see many of them doing PhDs and master's programs in high-level places and then going off and starting up a business of their own, a venture. And then fast forward, I think it was I can't remember the exact year, but around the time when you started perhaps with this program with Medic Footprints. And I saw a TED talk by a friend of mine, med school friend that was on the podcast recently. And he is a professor, he's an eye surgeon, he's a professor at the London School of Hygiene, Tropical Medicine, and he set up his own nonprofit to help, prevention of blindness in Africa. And all of these stories combined just made me think, I'm a public health physician. I don't need to just practice in academia or in public health settings, even though I do, to get the job done. There's other ways too.
Brilliant. But then why business? So you've gone full circle here from not liking business, I don't say hating is a very strong word, to actually business being your business. So tell me more about how you decided to go down that route, because there's a whole lot of other things that you could have done.
Absolutely. So I think it was about at least 10 years that I was looking for let me say it correctly. So, when you and I probably had the same story, that we applied to medical school and we had a goalpost that we were trying to aim for, and we got it. We got into med school, and that was hard enough. And we were like super happy. And then the next goalpost is finishing it, next post, and so on. You get into registrar training, specialty training, and we're always trying to grow and improve. And I remember ever since 2003, when I finished med school, I've been looking for a way out of the hospital setting. Mainly because, first of all, I actually didn't like the nature of the work, and I felt like we're focusing a lot of the attention, which we need to, don't get me wrong, that work is never going away. We need to go upstream. And the reason I came full circle is for at least 10 years, I was interested in entrepreneurship, yet I treated it as a side hobby where I'm mainly helping other people who are setting up their own businesses as a friendly, informal way, no money exchange. And then 2020 hits, the pandemic, and I was working, and I hit burnout myself, and I thought, enough's enough. Without going into too much detail, I'm happy to, but to keep it a short answer, I had a coach, and she advised me, it's not coaching, but she advised me at that point, what is it that you truly want? And I shared this experience and this story of what I truly wanted. And she's like, just go all in. What are you waiting for? So I had this risk-averse kind of attitude, which many of us do as clinicians, that I don't want to lose my reputation. I don't have the time to do this. I don't want to raise a lot of funding and invest in something that may fail, all of these things combined. And I've got a mortgage to cover. So I thought, what is the next best thing? And I thought, okay, I could have this side gig, hustle, whatever you want to call it, where I'm still practicing medicine, but I'm also doing this on the side with no risk whatsoever in any way, because I've got all the permissions and there's no financial risk. So I started just sharing we've got a ton of expertise to share, sharing the expertise, sharing the wisdom, sharing the networking, the people that we know, with those who are entrepreneurs from all sorts of professional backgrounds. And that advisory capacity has evolved to where we are now. And it's really a part-time business, and I love it. I genuinely love it.
And I really love that narrative, especially the bit where you're talking about balancing your side. You call it a side hustle, even though from what I heard from one of your podcasts, it's 2 days a week, right? You focus on the entrepreneur's doctor in 3 days. So, I mean, that's nearly half of your week, right? So it's a and also, your presence and your branding is quite substantial in the right spaces, obviously in the right networks. But you still maintaining both. They seem to be quite healthy, like both your career as a public health consultant and also as essentially, how do you call yourself? Essentially, in a nutshell, if you had to apply for a car insurance, do you write a business coach? I look at the drop down, I'm like, what do I choose? Yeah. But essentially, you're a business coach, entrepreneur. How would you describe it?
I'm a public health physician. That's the bottom line. The end goal is the same. It's improving population health and well-being. And I think we all have multiple tools in our toolkit. One is the way I practice public health, in epidemiology and health protection and health promotion and academic work. But also alongside it, I teach, I coach, I consult, I mentor. So all of these things combined are just one role at the end of the day. I'm a public health physician.
That's interesting. So looking back to why you trained as a medic, would you say that you're still practicing medicine happily because of the, in inverted commas, side hustle, being the entrepreneur's doctor?
So
it's like being Superman and Clark Kent, isn't it? You've got both of these identities that are kind of feeding off each other, would you say?
They do feed off each other for sure. I mean, you have to keep them, for anyone who's watching, listening, you've got to keep things separate. Obviously, for conflicts of interest, you've got to be careful when it comes to that, especially if you're working in the NHS, for example, in the UK or anywhere else for that matter. It can get a bit murky, the waters, if you're not careful. But having said that, the reason I got into medicine, I think it's the same for all of us. We want to help people, right? We want to help them have better lives, happier, healthier lives. And then getting into clinical work, I realized that we need that kind of work, the reactive role, but we need to be a bit more proactive. And there's various ways of doing that. And as doctors, we have, and not just doctors, but any health professional, we've got a responsibility to our communities, our patients. So what is the best way to do that? And if you think about it, I've shared this before, you probably know this already, but over the past 20 years, I've been thinking, okay, I need to learn more. I need to gain more qualifications and experience. And along the way, I've come to realize what actually determines our health is not where all the focus is, where all the attention is, which is healthcare. And I was contemplating, in the States, when I first went into public health, occupational medicine and public health is the same specialty. It's just one's a subset of the other. Here, they're slightly different for whatever reason. But having said that, we need to look beyond the clinical encounter if we want to truly prevent and treat disease. 80-90% of our health is way outside of hospital settings, but 80-90% of funding goes there. Sure, we need that, but there's so much more that needs to be done. So fast forward to the thing that was brewing before my burnout. It's not like I burnt out and said, look, let me just find a solution. It had been brewing. So I'd been thinking about this for quite some time. But I was thinking, okay, there's this movement, there's this trend from lifestyle medicine to digital health to artificial intelligence. Everyone wants to get into this game, which is great. We need this. But let's steer it in the direction where there's actual need, where there's actually a good return on the investment. Let's not keep wasting resources. So I'll keep that a short answer there, but happy to elaborate.
No, I really appreciate that. And let's take it to some part of the conversation that I was particularly interested in when we're talking about our medical education and the balance between academia and entrepreneurialism. So you've mentioned, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about you going to the States and getting into research-related degrees, PhDs. But are you currently in academia? I guess as a public health consultant, you're probably doing a lot of that anyway, as a day-to-day. But could you tell me more about your thoughts on the importance of academia versus entrepreneurialism as a doctor?
Sure. Let's go back to what we're trying to achieve, Abane. We're trying to use evidence, and I use that word sensitively. I'm not just talking about clinical evidence in a journal, scientific medical journal. Evidence that we experience as patients, experience as carers, experience as clinicians, and experience that's in the scientific realm as well. All of this evidence combined to practice good medicine or healthcare, whatever we want to call it, all with the intention of doing safe, good work, right? So how do we do that, and how do we keep advancing and pushing the envelope? One is through evidence-based methods, epidemiology, statistics, program evaluation, service evaluation, quality improvement, things that we are actually taught a little bit as undergraduate medical doctors and nurses perhaps, and pharmacists and so on. But as you go into your specialty training, that's probably where you get hints of it. We can come back to this in a second, actually, but I could debate forever about what is actually the content of undergraduate medical education. But the challenge with that is that's not where the job ends. There's so much more that we need. So for example, we talk about research and innovation, right? One comes before the other and vice versa. They kind of feed off each other. We do research, so we need, as medics, we need to learn about those evidence-based methods in epidemiology, to not just to do it, but to understand how it's used and to ask the right questions. So that's where the research comes into play, and we need that skill set for sure. But then it's about innovation. Okay, how do we turn that new knowledge to innovate something? And then you don't have to do it. You could partner with someone. You need an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur to bring that idea to fruition. These are all related things. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, they're very much linked, but I guess the question is like, why in practice there's more of a focus on the research than the innovation in medicine?
Okay, so I think innovation and entrepreneurship are emerging, as we can tell from, they are emerging. And so it's early days. I mean, I remember when I first moved back from the States, we were looking at how to bring lifestyle medicine to the UK and to Europe. And this is 2013. And then digital health, I had it on my thing. Let's set up a body that can promote digital health. This is way before everyone starts talking about it. We were starting to talk about creating a master's program in digital health in an academic setting. Fast forward, now we're starting to talk about entrepreneurship, and you've got the clinical entrepreneur program and so on. These are emerging trends, and there'll be others down the line. We just have to ride that wave and carry on being innovative in our careers as well as in what we do. And it's fine, so long as we have the end goal in mind. So let me just pivot and start speaking just a little bit, if it's okay, Abena. We should never forget, as health professionals, as doctors, that there's two sides of this coin. One is the end goal, which is we're there to serve and improve the health and well-being of our patients, of our community, global health for that matter. But never forget the concept of the oxygen mask on yourself before you serve everyone else. And that's where business, when done right, because it can go pear-shaped very quickly, when done right, you have the freedom to design the kind of business that you want that is conducive to the world that you want to live in, depending on what that looks like. And I think that's the added benefit that I've found from being in this.
I think I really echo that. And one of the important things for our vision at Medic Footprints is to ensure that doctors have the resources and the capacity and the freedom and the skills to tackle some of the world's most pressing issues, right? And they can only really do that if they are in the right place, state of mind, right? And so, especially we know a lot of doctors, especially post-pandemic or peri-pandemic, I should say, have really suffered in their roles, have had burnout, have had PTSD, have left and not looked back. And it was a terrible time for many in healthcare in general. And we're seeing the outcomes of how many healthcare professionals are striking as we speak, let alone civil servants. But going back to doctors, it's so important that they're equipped with some of those basic skills that enable them to go out there and create, so to speak. Whether it's I know we're talking about non-for-profits, but also businesses that can help do good or fill in some of the gaps that aren't currently served in healthcare or for patient care. As you mentioned, like 80 to 90% of funding is focused on hospital medicine, but we know medicine is much broader and wider than that. So yeah, I mean, for doctors who are considering going down the business route, perhaps, like as a way of developing their own careers, like what advice would you give to them on if they're considering it? They're saying, I have identified a problem that I think can be solved with a much better solution that's happening right here in my clinical practice. What would you advise would be the next step for them? Very high level, clearly.
So I would, yeah, absolutely. And I actually had a call with a clinician in the States just before our call, having that similar conversation. And I'll share the same process, really. I think I would take some time and slow down on that very first question in terms of what the problem is that you want to solve. And again, it's reflecting based on my experience, and not everyone has to be like me, but we all share some common threads, I think. So we see a problem in the clinical setting or in something in our world, some of us have been patients. I mean, YouTube Health had an event the other day, and many of the YouTube clinicians started because of a personal health issue as well, and same story as mine. So you've also got to think about, okay, what is the problem? But going back to that earlier point of the two sides of a coin, is one of the problems that you're trying to fix your own freedom and lifestyle, because that is something that many of us struggle with as as doctors, let's say. We don't have the time and space. And I was asking, this question of many people, because we define that freedom differently. And to be honest with you, it is like something we try to hide. It's not, there's a bit of a stigma to it, saying, oh, I want freedom, because people think you're there to serve patients and populations. Why do you want freedom? To me, freedom is not this gimmick that is promoted everywhere in terms of marketing. Oh, work from the beach and have a 4-hour work week. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about creating that space where you can start to actually think, allow the dust and murky waters to settle, so you can see through the clear water and find out where the real solutions are. I posed this today on LinkedIn. Like, honestly, with all of the stuff we're doing, is it making a real impact? Like, let's be serious for a second.
I have that question every day.
There you go.
Every day, every single conversation, right? Like, how much of your time is actually significantly contributing to moving things forward in whatever you're planning to do? You may have an answer for that.
So what if we used our collective wisdom as clinicians, and indeed the wider sector, to just open up some space? Let's slow down for a second. Like, give some people the space to think. And that's the beauty of public health medicine. But aside from that, give people, because even they, like we, still don't have time. So I work part-time to create that space. But let's create that space.
But then you filled it with other stuff, though.
But no. So if you look at my schedule, I've got ample space for thinking time. I don't book it up with stuff, right? It's thinking time. And it's really important that we do that, because we'll see things differently, and then slowly solutions I don't have a solution, but solutions might come about that way, better than the way we're going about it now.
Yeah, I mean, I think most doctors, we're in a habit of filling up all our time. I mean, I personally am, just because I don't know any better. And I'm trying to untrain my mind to be like, actually, you've got this space. Don't fill it with just doing stuff. Because I feel like if I'm not doing stuff, then it's not of any value to me, or it's not of any value to what I'm trying to achieve. But the reality is, when I'm relaxed, when I'm doing something that's completely unrelated, that's when the best ideas, thoughts, whatever, reflections, that's when they come to me and actually reasonably help me move forward. And so, like, now we're talking about schedules here, right? So, like, I left the NHS in 2007. That's my last NHS job, but not my last NHS work. So I left the NHS in 2017 and started off with actually a lot of free time. And then gradually it kind of built up into more clinics, occupational health clinics, more medic footprints, doing a whole load of medic footprints, like very blurred boundaries. And then over time, I've learned to really cut back on that. And now my schedule is, because I've just had a baby and I've got 2 kids, is 2 days of being a mother.
Nice.
Which isn't as easy as it sounds, because even though I'm a mother, I still got my I'm a work person, I'm a workhorse hat on, so I'm always thinking about work. I'm going to learn to push that aside. One main day of medic footprints, and then the rest is unscheduled time. So it's not mummy time, it's not formally medic footprints time, but it is unscheduled time. And that really does, it gets booked up stuff all the time, to be honest. But when there isn't anything, it really helps me. Like, I can sit back and I can actually, like, as you said, think, right? And do you find that, like, a lot of the entrepreneurs that you mentor have found the same benefits from actually taking that time?
Yeah, look, I think I put a post out the other day, and actually going back to occupational medicine and preventive medicine in the US, space medicine is one of the subspecialties of occupational medicine. Yeah. And I always had that in my mind. That's what I want to do when I grow up, just because it sounded cool. And then I thought, hey, wait a minute, we need space medicine by creating space to come up with better medicine. And this all came about when I was speaking at, the deputy chief medical officer in Wales. He came onto the podcast, and I asked him this very question, like, why don't we collect all these problems that we're seeing as health professionals and collate them somewhere and then do something about all this stuff that maybe the clinical entrepreneur program is promoting? And he said, where, when, who has time for all of this, right? And so it's all that's where it came from. And what I've found, I just want to share some insight there, that what others have told me that I work with, but also from myself, from like firsthand experience, there's a difference between time to think and a time to just let it be. And I found that the ideas come from the latter. When I go in with a specific question and I'm looking for an answer, and I'm just bombarding my thoughts or pen and paper or whatever, I don't get a good answer usually. It comes from here rather than here, where intuition resides. And the latter is just letting intuition wake up. And the ideas are way closer to home and what we need, and simpler.
I think that's really powerful thoughts and statement, really. So I think this has been a really fascinating discussion, and also really reflective. I'd love to hear it, just to close off. I mean, you've mentioned burnout. A lot of us have experienced burnout, mental health issues, you name it, physical health issues. And I see a lot of doctors who, as a result of that experience, use that as a catalyst for change. So what is my question? My question is, as an entrepreneur, we've talked about having that space, because obviously the risk is coming from burnout and going to entrepreneurialism, or even going into a startup or going into a new career. There's a risk that you will self-perpetuate that burnout, essentially. And I've had conversations even with doctors who are like, I've burnt out X number of times, and I'm like, but why? why have you put yourself through that again and again and again? And you know your boundaries. I burnt out once, and I'm never going to burn out again. Like that, that was my learning point. I knew what my limits are. So like, what advice would you give to a budding entrepreneur who has come through burnout, who is making change because of something they've experienced that has affected their mental health, but going into setting up a business, how do they navigate through that and protect themselves? Like, for example, I don't know, I'd love to hear from you, actually. Yeah.
No, please elaborate.
I'm not going to seed anything. I'm not going to I seed stuff, but like, I'm not going to seeding anymore. I am neutral.
I think first, sorry that you had to go through that too, and it's rough. There's quite a lot of people going through it, and it's burnout. I think is just tip of the iceberg, because we know people take their lives from these scenarios, and it's not something to be taken lightly. So whatever I'm about to share is just my experience and opinion. It doesn't mean that it's like professional advice at all. So please see someone here, talk to someone that is licensed to care for you. This
podcast is a different kind of therapy, and I think everyone realizes that. Okay, so
good.
Don't worry, you're not paying for it either. So yeah, and it's not NHS, I can tell you that. So yeah.
Maybe, so moving on, I think it comes back to a little bit about the moving goalposts that I talked about earlier, but also reflecting on every pivot that I've made throughout my career. And I've done for me, everything I can think of. I've been there, done that, from academia to business to consulting to media to public health to any of the works, right? And I've got a good sense of the pros and cons of each. But at the end of the day, I've gone full circle in a way, and I've found the blend. And I think one of the things about, when I was teaching in a medical school, two of them actually, the latest ones, teaching medical students about public health. And it's not about statistics. Again, it's not about p-values or confidence intervals. It's about improving population health. And I was talking through the methods that we can do it. You can remember this, eyes are glazed over. I was fast asleep throughout my public health module, right, in third year of medical school. It's terrible. And fast forward, I'm doing the same, and I'm seeing the same, effect on my students. And then I started changing the words up a little bit. So if you were going to create your own startup, you're going to do this, you're going to need this, that, everything is the same. The methodology, by the way, is exactly the same as with public health practice. We just don't think about it that way. And they started opening up. They started queuing to come and ask me questions after class. It's the same process, just the sources of funding might sometimes be different, but usually it's similar. So to cut a long story short, the methods are the same. So go back and learn your public health and come and talk to me if you want to. But the key question is, how can we prevent burnout in the first place? How can we work upstream to set the working conditions? You're an occupational health doctor. What can we do there, first of all? Secondly, as an individual, what can you do to stay not resilient, but just going back to slowing your mind and thoughts down a little bit, seeing things differently so that you can not only cope, but actually thrive on that busyness that we're all having to go through. And then if you have the option and opportunity to create this space and work part-time, less than full-time, and do whatever you want with that time, be clear what you want to achieve, because we all know entrepreneurship, startups is a risky game. There's no safety net. You can be working endless hours. And for those of us who have the traits that go into clinical medicine, if we apply that to entrepreneurship, that is pretty set for burnout. So we've got to be very careful. Design what you're trying to achieve upstream before you head down that path.
Thank you so much for those really important advice and insights. And what I really love about you is that you seem to slow, in a good way, you seem to slow things down. You have this calmness about you, which is actually really, really powerful, in the sense that I can imagine if you were mentoring and coaching someone who's an entrepreneur, that's essentially what they need, right?
Space.
Because as an entrepreneur, there's so much going on in here, and there's so much that you need to do in like no time or yesterday. And like having that time and space to step back and like really clarify and refocus is essential to moving forward. So thank you. I think this has been a really, I was quite interested to like see where this goes. And like a lot of our conversations that we have on the podcast and the interviews that I've done, it goes back to lifestyle, it goes back to well-being, it goes back to self-care. And we forget that as doctors, like that is essential to our survival. And this is an opportunity to invest in that if we are going to be successful in anything that we do choose to do in our lives. Because, a career for life, not so much the case anymore, but working for like 80% of 90% of your life as you have to, you know what I mean? Like that's pretty much a given these days, right? Unless you make it, this is why a lot of us is going into business. We hope to make it rich early and then retire, right? So you don't have to rely on that pension that's been building up. So
I'll just reflect and summarize with my take on things, and I just love what you're doing. I said this before we hit record. I was thinking about what you were doing in the early days, just passively hidden behind the scenes, and we need more people like you doing this good work. So keep going.
Thank you. And obviously you are doing great work with healthcare professionals in general, especially on the entrepreneurial side. If anyone's got any questions or wants to reach out, how do they get hold of you?
Sure. I think the easiest, I'm sure you'll put a link somewhere, but the website is Entrepreneurs, if you can spell it, because I have a hard time spelling it, entrepreneurs.doctor, and there's some free resources there, and it's on YouTube as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure that we will touch base again in this whole ecosystem of entrepreneurialism in healthcare.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks, B.
Thank you.
Really hope that you enjoyed this episode. It was fantastic meeting Behrooz, also a public health consultant. Occupational health and public health have their links, are very closely aligned, but as you said in the interview, not so much in the UK for some reason. But anyway, if you'd love to hear more, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and join our mailing list at medicfootprints.org. Join our mission. On to the next episode.